Hey, everybody. Hope and pray that you're doing well today as we come to our word from the Word. And today, that word is ticket. Ticket. Now, like that golden ticket, sometimes like Willy Wonka in the chocolate factory, right? We feel like that sometimes when we've done things just right, we feel like we have received this golden ticket that gives us special privileges. Now, Paul is continuing in Galatians chapter 5. He has this discussion, or if you want to really say this, debate, maybe is the best word for it, between the law and grace. It's this argument of why you don't go for what the flesh wants you to do and you go for the spirit. The end of Galatians chapter 5 talks about just that. It talks about the works of the flesh and the fruit of the spirit. But before that, he's talking about those who seem like, hey, we're gonna follow the laws of circumcision, basically, so we can be saved. It's kind of the idea there of, well, if I'm gonna follow the law, then that's I'm gonna follow the parts that I want to. Is almost even the thought, so that they could say that they're probably trying to argue they're more Christian than others. So you can read for yourself Galatians chapter 5, you'll read this discussion. But the reason I say this ticket is the part right in the middle, in between these two statements, in between the statements about the circumcision and uncircumcision, and then moving into the flesh and the spirit, the works of the flesh and fruit of the spirit. There's an interesting part right there in the middle, and that's what I want us to look at today. Galatians chapter 5, verses 13 through 15. For you, brethren, have been called to liberty. Only do not use liberty as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, beware lest you be consumed by one another. He says, "Look, if you want to," he opens up the chapter really talking about being enslaved and going back into bondage. We've talked about that some already. So he says he's basically saying, if you want to go back into slavery, then be a slave of Christ, be a bondservant of Christ, be a slave to the love that He wants you to have for others. And he says basically, if you want to take all that is revealed to us in the Old Testament, everything that some were trying to throw completely away, he says, we've talked about that some in past videos, and Paul has talked about it a tremendous amount. He says that Christ has fulfilled the law, right? Christ is the fulfillment of what we see through everything in the Old Testament, and everything that we see through the prophets and even the psalmist, and even as we see in the Torah, in the first 5 books of the Bible, that we see that Jesus was coming, and He has fulfilled the Lion from the tribe of Judah. He has fulfilled all the prophecies that He would be born of a virgin, born in Bethlehem, that He would, that He would make the lame to walk and the blind to see, and raise the dead as well. And then He would be raised Himself from the dead, and all these things that the Old Testament reveals to us. So one, don't throw away the Old Testament, because otherwise, how would you know that Christ was that fulfillment? But even for the Christians in this context that he's writing to, he says, those of you that think that, okay, well, if I'm circumcised, or I do this one part of the law and it's going to make me a better Christian, he says, you're going back into slavery of the law again. He says, if you really want to fulfill the law, if that's in your mind, you think, okay, I've got to still fulfill the Old Testament law, he says, you can fulfill it all in this statement: love your neighbor as yourself. Isn't it interesting that Jesus said, what? They asked him for the commandments, right? Well, he summed up he summed it all up in two. He says, love the Lord your God with everything that you have, and love your neighbor as yourself. So he says, if everything could be fulfilled there, Paul is basically saying, okay, you need to love God, but if you want to, that's the vertical relationship. But if you're worried about now, you need to worry about your horizontal relationship. You need to love each other. That's why he says in verse 15, because if you don't watch it, In other words, those of you who are living on these two extremes of grace gives me the golden ticket to sin, and that's the liberty. He says, don't use it as an opportunity for the flesh. So you had those that would take grace to one extent and say, man, I can do whatever I want. This is kind of the Romans quote, right? Should we sin more so that grace would abound? He says, absolutely not. Or if you go to the other extreme, the legalistic extreme, right? Saying, hey, you've got to do both. You come by grace, but man, you've got to work for your salvation instead of work because of your salvation. He says, if you don't watch it, what you're going to end up doing is destroying each other. Right? You can have two on those extremes. And think about even in our culture today, that you have some on those extremes, maybe truly saved, but they're so focused on tearing the other one down that they both lose. See, that's what he's getting at the heart of this. He says, you've been saved by grace. It came through faith, but you're saved by grace. So now extend that grace to others. Don't use it as an opportunity for the flesh. If you look at the works of the flesh that he's getting ready to describe, when we're more focused on getting our way than we are about serving others, so the whole picture, as we've been talking about so much on Sundays, that right, our connection and us being the body of Christ. We're never going to do that if we feel as though, hey, I've already punched my ticket to heaven. Now I can do whatever I want. And we trample over whoever we want to on the way there. And we kind of go like all those in the Good Samaritan story that walked right by those that are in the ditch without helping them because, hey, I've got my ticket and I've got my way. If we truly want to live out fulfilling the law and living this life of grace, we need to do it by loving our neighbor as ourselves. I guess the question is, will you do it? God bless you. And I pray you have a great, great day.